This abuse goes right to the heart of the British establishment. They will never ever let it out because it controls global politics. It has massive blackmail value, huge blackmail value, and there's a commodity in the children.
Throughout my journalistic career, I never had any interest in the topic I'm about to explore. The sexual habits and tastes of powerful people, that was their business, their private lives, and everyone deserves that right. But in the last year or so, a new picture of how the world really works has come into sharp focus, and it's not pretty. It's convinced me that private lives do matter profoundly. They shape the world these leaders seek to impose, reveal the true measure of a politician's moral compass, and expose their vulnerability to shadowy forces, eager to wield blackmail as a weapon. How could ordinary citizens like us have been so blind to it all? In this documentary, I'll sketch a new map of that world, one that will feel utterly unfamiliar to many. Its contours emerge in fragments, allegations scattered in dribs and drabs across the mainstream media, but seldom if ever woven into a coherent whole. So let me be your Columbus charting this uncharted territory. This is not the final word, merely the end of the beginning.
Refugees do not come to a country and thank it by raping the children of that country.
The big news in Britain at the moment, the topic everyone is discussing, is rape among migrants. Recent migrants, asylum seekers, people crossing in boats, and also rapes by migrants from further back who went to settle in northern towns, became taxi drivers and various other such jobs, and raped thousands of girls through the decades. Rage of the two issues is combined in people's minds, and there's a lot of anger on the streets of the UK in the summer of 2025. But this documentary is not about those kinds of rape. It's about rape at the top of society, sexual abuse, paedophilia, things like that.
You've only got to look at some of these men that are going into those migrant hotels. There were 2 Afghans the other day. They were in a hotel, asylum seekers, my backside. You know, have you seen any women on board? They're all in, you go down to Kent, I've known this for 5 or 6 years. They come across, a lot of them are short. They say I'm separated from my mother or whatever. And they're 14, 15 years old, so they say. And they're not, they're grown men. And those Afghan people that came out of those hotels and raped a 12-year-old girl, why aren't we sending them straight back? You know, and don't go back to where you came from. Pakistan, wherever you're from, bye-bye. You know, the people from Albania, we've got so many Albanians at it now, Somalis.
With your experiences of that, would you say that Britain's political class is kind of clueless about this?
Where is Britain going? I don't think the political classes are clueless. I think they don't want to know because a lot of them are doing it.
A lot of them are doing it. A lot of people in the upper class and political elite are involved in sex abuse themselves. That's why they don't care so much about the Pakistani taxi drivers and Albanian refugees doing it. They themselves are involved. But could this lead to something? Consider this. Let's not forget that Marie Antoinette and her alleged incestuous relationship with her son was one of the rocket fuels of the French Revolution. Could sex abuse revelations be the rocket fuel for a modern British revolution? The morality of it is something that anyone, even the commonest person, can understand. So tell me, do you think the UK is heading towards revolution?
Well, it seems to be so. People like Neil Oliver on social media are calling for revolution, and it's not really tongue-in-cheek. People who are aware and intellectual and have the ability to reason through what's going on know it's pretty close, yeah.
what's going on. Can you tell us, in terms of education, decline of borrowing ability, increased crime, a couple of things that are wrong?
Well, there's two-tier policing and two-tier almost everything. Legal system, things going on with the National Health Service, that only employs certain people from certain backgrounds. We're finding ourselves really disadvantaged within housing. It's almost impossible to afford a family home. The depression rates and the people signed off benefits on sickness benefit is the highest in Europe. And from my understanding of how society has worked within the institutional aspects and the neglect that they show, for instance, abuse survivors, we're at the point of collapse, basically. And when you think about people coming from overseas, war-torn countries, they may get therapy. You have a child with mental health needs or an adult, they won't get any service at all. It's a complete farce. This is where I learned to ride up here. Little tiny
Sam grew up in a small idyllic village near Luton, near the M1 motorway, north of London. Just a village shop, lovely houses. The parents were young, didn't know what they were doing, and from a young age, Sam was invited in as a children's helper to the upper middle class village elite.
On one occasion, one of my dad's friends wanted to put mud all over me to make me look more like a waif in the parade, and my mum said, no, don't like that, that's like makes us uncomfortable, sort of thing. So I think there were elements of attempted care and protection. It just perhaps, I think, the people involved were too powerful. I think they realised that they couldn't go against them. They were just really, I mean, so many people find it hard to go against these people. My parents were only in their early 20s, and I try to justify them with all their emotional issues themselves, that they didn't completely want it to be this way. But there's some pretty dark forces at work. You can't control them all. You can't. And they took a very much school of hard knocks view with me in a way that I just had to, I don't know, just survive it, be toughened up and just survive it. Maybe it's a military thing in the families. They just wanted me to be a survivor, and being a victim wasn't on the cards. They didn't like to be that way. So up here, I don't want to talk too loudly outside the house, because this is where one of the abuse situations took place, where those two girls came down in underwear and crawling on the ground. So when we get near that house, I'll be quiet, and that's near where the devil worship sign is.
Every step we took was like another step into her past, and she increasingly took on the behaviour of a young girl, running away down these passageways to escape her abusers. Today, she points out the different houses where abuse took place. The victims were the girls and boys of the village, not just her. The perpetrators, respectable people who wore a facade of utter normality to the outside world. Some of them still live in the places they did then.
And they got us to lie on the floor, turn the lights off and stare into mirrors so we could watch our faces change. I've heard somewhere that that's a tactic I've heard somewhere it's a tactic.
From being little helpers at adults' parties and being touched up and having witnessed as adults exposing themselves, some of them, like Sam, were taken on and turned into lovers by older men. Sexual intercourse with her main abuser started when she was 12. He was 19 years older. They're all part of a network which centred on the prominent people of the villages surrounding, doctors, lawyers, professionals, and at the head of this was a man who was Margaret Thatcher's gunslinger in the battle against wicked morality. And suddenly, ringing in my ears are the voices of another era, the 1980s, when we both grew up, and Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet towered over the scene. I followed politics very closely then.
Well, will Norman Kevin now quit politics for good, or will he, in 3 or 4 years' time, make a comeback and contend for the leadership of the party? Coupled with the
Broadcasters, politicians, all of us have a responsibility to uphold the civilized values which underpin the law. We owe it to society of which we are a part, and we owe it especially to future generations who will inherit the society that we create.
The bunting. The buddleia is where I used to catch butterflies. There's several buddleia bushes where I used to go butterfly catching, and men were exposing themselves. And the wife of one of them was there, said, "Don't do that, you'll scare them," appearing to be upset by it, but of course she wasn't. She's here.
So any questions is taking place here in Kimpton Memorial Hall, 5th of September 2025.
Oh, I've got a few for sure. Indeed.
Come here and ask a few questions.
Oh goodness me, I would still feel scared of doing. I could try, but I feel scared of confronting people now.
So this is the Kimpton Memorial.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so you should go and say.
Yeah, sure. Oh, a little question. I've got a little list of people. Yeah, yeah. That's what he's famous for saying. Apparently, he's got a little list about single mothers, about people on benefits, and all those horrible scrounger types who would probably. It was the minister. He had a saying about that. He had a little poem. I've got a little list about single mothers, about people on benefits, all the types of people who might be the most likely to have things to say. I've got a little list too. Yeah, for sure.
And this is the obvious question is, how do we know these things happened? It's just her words against others. I'll leave it unsaid and realise there is a possibility that she could be making claims out of the blue. But I was researching this story and found some back copies of a scurrilous 1990s magazine called Scallywag, which was supposed to be a more ambitious magazine than Private Eye, and I remember it back from then. And I found some articles on this politician, whom I'll call P, and his friend M, who was an equally famous Tory politician at the time. P was the Secretary of State for Social Welfare, an equally sensitive area when it came to family values, of which he was an enthusiast. We, Scallywag, published a story on that night of the last general election when Messrs P and M had been disturbed on the top floor of the DTI building, engaged in a sexual act by a security guard attracted by the commotion. The guard had reported this to his superiors, who'd noted what he'd said and then promptly sent him on a new assignment deep in obscurity. But apart from that article written by a long-dead journalist in a defunct magazine, which you can only find in the darker corners of the internet, there's nothing compromising, and even that wasn't that compromising. I mean, homosexuality isn't illegal, nor is wife swapping. That's their own business, although it does contrast with their politicians' family values facade. But there's no hint of child abuse or anything illegal in that material. So I decided this is as far as I could go, and I don't want to get into slander and libel issues. But it wasn't completely dead. I contacted a guy called John Wedger, who confirmed that these things did go on. He was a friend of Sam's, and he obliged me with an interview. He's a former policeman. He was first working as a detective constable with the river police in London in the 1980s and 90s, and he discovered a lot of paedophiles living on houseboats because it avoided the onerous registration requirements for paedophiles with their local police station, because being on the canals between districts and you could easily shift location before the deadline, before you had to register. And houseboats were attractive for kids, and so a lot of these houseboats became dens of iniquity. And apparently you indicated your preference by having a male doll or a female doll, tiny Barbie type doll, or Action Man on deck, you know. And he caught dozens of people, and then a young, eager detective, he thought, well, you know, I've cleaned this up. But he got a warning in the corridor from a senior police officer saying, you know, you're getting too good at this job and people are beginning to notice. And literally 2 weeks later, his detective inspector took him off the job and said, we're moving you. You're going to get honours and everything, and you did a fantastic job, but we're going to move you. You can take your pick.
Child abuse investigations have, sadly, a reputation for being, you know, the lowest conviction rate of any serious crime. Murders basically solve themselves. 90% of all murders get solved, and it's usually domestic, or it's solved within a very, very quick period of time, you know, apart from organised criminality. But child abuse, you don't get that. It's usually historic, and usually the victims and survivors have complex mental health problems, which make it difficult and at times impossible for them to ever take the stand.
So he joined the Vice Squad in Mayfair and Soho, two of London's areas that are famous for prostitution, especially Soho, where there's a lot of street prostitution. Again, he was devoted, dedicated, driven, and managed to talk to some of the girls one girl, Zoe, was particularly articulate, but also very distrusting and difficult to handle, but he thought there was something in that girl, so he took her in, and he was wearing casual clothes and he had a casual demeanour. He wasn't like the other coppers, and talked to her, and she started to trust him and started to tell him what was going on. And she said that her madame, her pimp, a lady, was able to avoid being prosecuted because she knew the police, and she mentioned the names of the police officers. She flirted with the cops. And she also said that if she was ever taken to the magistrate's court, she was let off because the judge in question was one of her clients. She also mentioned, you know, celebrities and so on have been involved. And this is Soho, the famous red light district in London. And he wrote up a report, and he thought he was going to get gold stars for it, you know, and mentioned everything in great detail. But his detective inspector in command hauled him down and told him this.
The client list became worrying because the client list started involving police officers, politicians, people involved in the entertainment industry, businessmen, you know, and this is where the need to subdue this. So when I reported my findings to a senior officer, because this was growing by the day, and their lifestyle was so appalling that it was harmful to their health, if not to their life. You know, a lot of these kids were supporting Class A drug addictions and life-threatening conditions, STDs such as HIV. A lot of them had contagious tuberculosis, all through sexual contact and drug. And these were kids in the care system. And when I reported my findings, I was threatened by one of the most senior police officers, went on to be one of the most senior police officers in the country. At the time, he was very, very high up in the detective world. And he said to me, if you mention a word of this, you will lose your home, your job, and your children. You must not ever, ever speak about this. This will FUCK the Metropolitan Police, past, present, and future. If you mention a word of this, you will be thrown to the wolves. You must understand me. So he was telling me that if I spoke about my findings, I would lose my home, my job, and my children.
He kept quiet about the growing corruption he saw inside the police and the way that the whole sexual abuse thing was covered up until about 2014, when the Jimmy Savile scandal came out. Now, Jimmy Savile was this British television personality who was famous for getting people, girls, boys, to write into him with wishes for what they wanted. You know, let's say a boy dying of cancer would say, "I really wish I could fly in the Concorde." And so Jim will make that a reality. Get in touch with British Airways, put the boy on the Concorde, sit with the boy on the Concorde. It would all make a sort of nice little half an hour Saturday tea time. Jimmy Savile and Jim will Fix It became a staple of British television, popular television and popular culture for decades. Well, it turned out he was an abuser of children on quite a serial scale, and this was covered up by the BBC. This came out in 2014 or thereabouts. So John Wedger decided to go public with his information. Now, the police came down on him like a ton of bricks, and they accused him of gross misconduct. But he persisted and reached out to others who'd suffered the same. There was a woman called Maggie Oliver who'd blew the whistle on the Pakistani and Bangladeshi rape gangs and drug gangs in the north, and she got into trouble. And then there was a case of a children's home in Jersey, I think, where another guy, Lemmy Harper, got in trouble. So he got some sense of comfort from talking to them. They'd also been accused of serious misconduct, you know, for being whistleblowers. But anyway, he was eventually sacked and ended up working on a building site with very little money, but decided to try and tell the story as honestly as possible. He recommended that if I go down the rabbit hole, I too would get strange things happening to me. He says it's like a curse.
This abuse goes right to the heart of the British establishment. They will never ever let it out because it controls global politics. It has massive blackmail value, huge blackmail value. And there's a commodity in the children. There was a former chief constable of Wiltshire, an incredibly brave man called Mike Veal. And Mike Veal set up Operation Conifer, and he started interviewing victims and survivors of child abuse perpetrated by our former Prime Minister, Ted Heath. And Mike Veal boldly stated in 2015, it may have been a bit earlier or later, but circa 2015, he boldly stated on an interview with Sky News that if Ted Heath was alive now, he would undoubtedly be charged with numerous offences against young children, especially young boys.
But I was wondering what other big game there was out there, and if there was something in what Sam had said that could help me. Sam got engaged in the question of Charles's sexuality after she was taken to hospital in North London and, as it were, deprogrammed by the cabal who were engaged in sexual abuse in her village. She was now 16 and having a love affair with one of her abusers, technically legal but still psychologically subordinate. This man's wife was jealous and kidnapped Sam and had her taken to the Prior Hospital in North London, where she was subjected to a series of shocks.
It was the first time we'd made love in a bed the night before, because it was normally outside when we were usually limited by the summer and good weather on horseback or cycling. So, and it wasn't always that, sometimes we'd just talk, sometimes we'd meet up. But it was a post-traumatic stress occurred from that point, and I found it very difficult to recall the exact moments in great detail for a few years after. They dragged me into a car. I was blindfolded by his handkerchief. His wife was in the front seat. I had plastic plant fasteners tied around my hands, and the long drive all the way to this part of London. I was then in a state of semi-consciousness, and they talked to me about my sexual history. And if I answer, who was your first sexual experience? And I was like, sort of like, if I couldn't remember quickly, I was going to be, they administered a type of pain. All right, I have a scar here, and it's visible on an X-ray, because afterwards I had it covered up with a piece of cotton wool, and there's a very, very tiny half centimetre area that's still visible. For a little while afterwards, I was unable to concentrate. My balance was affected. Like kind of, you know, we actually had a brain damaged cat once. It kind of like walked around in circles. It was kind of like that part of me was kind of just like made me a bit unbalanced, and I couldn't quite function in society. But I was being a teenager. I did absolutely all I could to try, even though I was isolated from my friends for quite a few months after this, I tried just to live life and fake it, you know what I mean, fake it.
After she got out, and in the years that followed, she started collecting stories about celebrities who'd been taken to this Priory hospital, famous people, and she researched some of the cases. Charles's valet was one of the men taken to the hospital. After he was released, he fell into deep, deep depression and died of unknown causes. But he was sitting on a big secret.
With somebody called George Smith, who was had a testimony of abuse which happened inside the palace. Because he was a Falklands veteran and had a little bit of an alcohol problem that he could easily be discredited. In fact, when he came out about his abuse with what he saw connected to Prince Charles and the palace, somebody had been accused in the palace of rape, and his involvement with Prince Charles, he was afraid he would be killed, and he was paid for, his detention was paid for in the Priory Hospital by Prince Charles. Diana went in with a tape recorder and tried to gain his testimony, and she recorded it, but the tape went missing. It was supposed to be being held by Burrell, and Burrell was brought to trial, and it would have been a big publicity event had a lot of it come out, but the Queen stopped the trial. He had been given permission to have those possessions of Diana's, apparently, so nobody heard much more about it. But because of my connection to the hospital chain where he was detained, I immediately, my suspicions were raised, especially when Charles was paying for his detention, and he died at 44, unknown causes, again put down to alcohol.
There is actually material on the internet talking about Charles's alleged sex with his personal servant called Michael Fawcett, and the allegation by George Smith that he saw this take place. The British press barely covered it, but there was one article that talked about 3 witnesses in the servants' quarters who said that George Smith had come back from serving breakfast and said directly what he'd seen. A chef, actually, Chris O'Brien, claimed that he had to fight off sexual advances from male colleagues, and that outrageous sex parties took place within the palace walls. The Queen had no idea what was going on, he said. Diana was said to be very suspicious of the so-called gay mafia inside the palace, and if she was recording Smith to say this, obviously that was a threat to Charles, and it might have caused him or someone to take action against Diana. And of course, those tapes disappeared. It's a mystery that merits further investigation. And this is not the only thing, if we go even further down the rabbit hole, as this segment shows. The shocks administered at that hospital affected her for years. And at the age of 19, she had a breakdown, took stelazine, an antipsychotic drug that was once used on Soviet psychiatric patients who'd been dissidents. But she picked herself up in her 20s and eventually got a job she loved, required a lot of outdoors work, and started a family. As her mental health improved, she started digging in the various mysteries. Apart from the valet story and her own, she's also been looking at other mysterious incidents connected to the Priory Hospital and found one. Paul Robeson was one patient who received electric shocks in the 1960s. This incredibly popular baritone singer was a superstar in the 40s and 50s, but fell foul of the American mainstream because of his embrace of the Soviet Union. He was an activist, linguist, and very popular, but once he was committed to a series of electroshocks at the Priory in the 1960s, this is in the public domain, he became practically a vegetable and died in 1976, never having recovered. She's now fully cured and has joined a campaigning group that puts pressure on Parliament to highlight victims and their perpetrators. She frequently visits social, political meetings that have sprung up in the last few years that challenge the mainstream view on everything from COVID to abuse at the highest level. There are meetings every evening in London pubs, and she tries to rally the troops. Is this the kernel of a public movement for change in Britain that's more cerebral than the marching men and women who want to hang all the rapists?
80 rates in migrant hotels and all these...
Maybe, as this documentary shows, some of that anger against Muslims is misdirected. Necessary, yes, but not sufficient. Tells some of the story, but it doesn't tell the whole story. This is not merely a matter of historical justice for the victims of children's homes and Pakistani rape gangs, for individuals like Sam, or even a Buckingham Palace valet. The issue of abuse, or at the very best embarrassing, albeit legal sexual relations, remains acutely relevant with profound implications for the UK's and indeed the world's future.
This abuse goes right to the heart of the British establishment.
The Ukrainian war might be an area where political blackmail using sex is very much out in play. What is the sexuality of Keir Starmer? This could be a question of the survival of our European civilization.
This is an open secret at Westminster that those question marks have been around for a long time, and papers have been extraordinarily restrained in not publishing any of that speculation, and even whether they've got, maybe there are publications that have more information than I'm aware of.
Do you think there's something wrong with Britain's elites?
Most definitely. They are very disconnected and have been for a long time from the general population. We can't relate to them at all. We don't see any figureheads that resemble us. Also within the media, we very rarely see somebody who is really saying it how it is. And even in drama, we see very contrived productions of what we're supposed to aspire to or what is the new normal.
Like you saved me, that they're mending your wings and holding them up. Fly.
Qu'on soit slim, qu'on soit gros, on est tout simplement tout nus. Nous vivons comme on est né, nus, vivons comme on est né. Simplement tout nu, tout simplement tout nu, tout simplement tout nu, tout simplement tout nu, tout simplement tout nu.
So there's a kind of cultural re-engineering going on by the elite.
Definitely, and bring into this their behaviour with the war machine in the Ukraine and the people trafficking that we see globally, and abuse scandals. They don't seem to have the same orientation towards wanting to support family life and the way things were at all.
And Keir Starmer, has been criticised by his own party for spending most of his time on Ukraine when he should be doing domestic politics, a country that's kind of falling apart with mass immigration, soaring prices, immigration demonstrations, soaring borrowing costs and all the rest of it. And he locks himself into study and focuses on Ukraine, which is a country thousands of miles away. You know, why? Well, it begs the question is, what determines Starmer's attachment to this war? I mean, why does he care? Why does he not care about his own country? Is there somebody who has a hold on him from Ukraine? We're allowed to ask questions. Is there blackmail going on? Does Starmer have an emotional bond with Ukraine? Are young men travelling to London to blackmail people inside the British deep state or the British administration to have a more positive view of the Ukraine war and support Ukraine with all their might? In a way, the Ukrainian intelligence service would be remiss if they were not trying to do this sort of thing. And of course, they're descended from the KGB, lest we forget. In fact, there's a documentary by the excellent Urban Scoop Films that shows that young kids are being trafficked to Britain with intelligence agencies as an intermediary.
Well, you're talking about a coordinated effort by Ukrainian secret services to abduct children, often of Russian heritage from the Donbass area, where the conflict was, and to hand them over to, I believe, people linked to agencies in the UK. So it's basically a secret services in Ukraine to a secret services in the UK operation.
Why do you believe they're doing this?
I think there's a lot of money in it. I think, they can only sell drugs once. We're now hearing over the last few years that there's more money in child trafficking than there is in drugs. They only sell the drugs once. They can sell the child dozens of times a day, as abhorrent as all that is. There's a lot of money in it. And also, I think that paedophilia, from my experience and my investigations while I was an MP and since, it's endemic in the UK. There's no appetite to investigate child abuse, as we know, whether that's the Muslim rape gangs or trafficking children in from foreign countries for the paedophiles. And also, it's the ultimate compromat. Once you're involved in any of that, either the trafficking and the money or the use and abuse of those children, once you're in that club, there is no way out. They can be assured that you can be controlled, and they can be assured if you're in their club that's absolute loyalty.
And what sort of level are the senior individuals we're talking about UK side?
We're talking about people who are linked into three-letter agencies in the UK, and also people who are linked into the Foreign Office and very close to the government.
Wow.
Too close.
Rumours going around that apparently Keir Starmer's been sleeping with Ukrainian rent boys. Yeah, true. Personally, I don't think it's true. I think they're just saying it to try and slander Ukrainian rent boys.
If these problems go to the very top of society, literally, how to root it out? It seems like a terrible, huge task. Well, one possibility would be to have a public inquiry.
In the UK, we've had the Epstein scandal. We've had it. We had a guy called Fred West and his wife Rose West. They were just a bargain basement version of Epstein and Maxwell. They were procuring children for sex parties, and these children, some of them got murdered. Well, many of them got murdered. There's a lot more missing kids. It's like a shoplifter. Shoplifter gets caught for 1,000th of what they've done. Getting caught's just bad luck. On the whole, they get away with it. It's the same as these people. Fred and Rose West were connected to all sorts of people, all sorts of level of society, and were involved with the local law enforcement, and there was cover-ups around them. Pornography, child pornography, all these allegations were around them. And out of the 900...
Are they connected to politicians? And
undoubtedly, in my opinion. Fred West was running a pornography sort of thing, an underground porn, homemade porno thing. 950 videotapes were seized. None of them were ever produced in evidence. And they went missing. None of them were ever even scrutinised and looked at.
Would there have been blackmail tapes, like Epstein tapes?
Yeah, of course, but without doubt, it will be filmed and covertly filmed. And the other thing, what happened to Fred West? Hung himself on remand, exactly the same as Epstein. Once you see the algorithm, you see the algorithm. And I was asked about what is my opinion with the Diddy, P. Diddy case and the Epstein case. I said, listen, I know what's going to happen. I'll tell you what's going to happen, right? The government's going to intervene. They're going to promise the world, no stone unturned, Trump drain the swamp. It's absolute bullshit. It's a nonsense. It's just words. The government will hold an investigation, then it'll go to an inquiry, and all they will do, they will take ownership of the evidence, the victims and survivors, and then case closed, never to be seen again.
Okay, so that won't work out, but he did have another interesting idea, which was to vet politicians, and why not?
As a police officer, if I had any connections to any criminal, I could lose my job, and it is a pretty good job. I wouldn't even get my position, or I'd be asked to be removed from my position. I had one job as a field intelligence officer dealing with top secret information. I was vetted to the highest degree possible, and they even needed to know all my financial affairs and also all my sexual partners. And if I was involved in extramarital affairs, if I was involved in swinging, dogging, this sort of stuff, I wouldn't get the job. And if I was homosexual, I wouldn't get the job, because it meant that I was promiscuous and subject to blackmail, right? So how comes we can have prime ministers that...
I went to central London again to visit an old friend. I knew Gawain Toler from our time together on the Sprout, a sort of private eye type magazine based in Brussels, which brought English sarcastic investigative journalism to the EU and to Belgium. One scoop the magazine published concerned the Dutroux scandal about a molester and rapist of that name who kept girls in basements. It was the biggest scandal in Belgian history. The official inquiry concluded that Dutroux had acted on his own and that the girls were kept for his pleasure and his pleasure alone. The Sprout's reportage refuted that and found documentation showing police cars had monitored men going in and out of the buildings to visit and rape the girls. It was a fantastic scoop, but the Sprout was convicted in a Belgian court on a technical measure. The publication of the girls' autopsy photos was a breach of their family's privacy, and the magazine was fined tens of thousands of euros, almost bringing it to bankruptcy. Gawain has his roots in courageous investigative journalism, similar topics to the one I was now investigating, but he'd switched tracks in the mid-2000s, had become press director to a certain Nigel Farage, then a maverick MEP in the European Parliament. The rest, they say, is history.
My name is Gawain Toler. I've been involved in the broader movement, what I call the tribe of parties led by Nigel Farage since 2004. Where we first worked on getting the United Kingdom to leave the EU, which we succeeded in, and now, with Reform UK, I was the Director of Communications until September last year, and I'm standing for the party board, but we're a party that went from 12% of the polls about 18 months ago to, we're now leading at 32, 33 points, 9, 10 points ahead of the Labour Party and leaving the Tory party in the dust. And what's the purpose of it? Is to turn our country around.
Right. I mean, it's been an incredible journey. When I knew you, I worked for your magazine, The Sprout, which is a kind of Brussels private eye. And then, we were both pirates in a way, outsiders from the system. And then you've got a job with Farage and you've climbed your way up.
But Farage also was a buccaneer. He was never part of the system.
Right.
I mean, he may be public school in this city and politics, but he is not establishment.
You were outsiders in Brussels in a way, and then you became outsiders in the UK. What's the difference between working in the Brussels, opposing the Brussels system, and being a sort of upstart in the British system?
In Brussels, we were an eccentric anomaly. Actually, I think most of the continental politics enjoyed us because we were just eccentric Brits. Of course, in the UK, because we tap into something about the British people, we are much more dangerous. Because the changes that we need to make to turn our country around could not happen if you were members of the European Union. Brexit was only the start. What we're doing now, and what Reform is doing now, is the main course. That was the entree, that was the hors d'oeuvre.
Right.
The main course is what we're trying to achieve now.
Right.
And that is to utterly change the system in this country.
Wow.
To rejig the whole thing.
Wow.
And to bring us back.
Total reform. Sweeping away everything. Radical rejuvenation. The old system has to go. These are strong words, and I didn't expect it. I knew reform are called reform, but I also knew they were attached to everything old and English. And England has not had a revolution for nearly 400 years. It's an enormous task, of course, but I thought I'd remember those words and put them to him in some years. When I asked him off the record if he meant also getting to grips with the deep state and these endless potentialities for blackmail, he was very cautious, but he knows what I'm talking about. We'll see. So regard this as a first sketch, a preliminary survey of a new continent, the old continent, the realm of surface-level politics splashed across the media, where the Chancellor and Shadow Chancellor bicker endlessly over wind farms or VAT rates. That world has already been mapped, just as the known world of the Middle East, India and Europe stood in 1492. The politics runs on blackmail, with nearly everyone in Congress nursing skeletons in their closet, is something Tucker Carlson, the world's most viewed independent journalist, has been saying for years now. With all his connections to Washington, he should know. This account adds the British angle, but it's incomplete, and there's more work to be done.